Welcome to EconWorks. We live in an era of massive platforms, global supply chains, and unprecedented market concentration. But behind every headline about a merger or a legal settlement, there is a deeper mechanical struggle for control. On this show, we pull back the curtain on the invisible forces shaping our economy. We look past the talking points to examine where law, power, and markets actually collide, and how those collisions redefine the world we live in. Coming to you from the EconWorks desk, we're diving into a breakdown of the systems that run our modern life. This is EconWorks. Today's episode, the PIX tax, analyzing the Apple versus Brazil antitrust showdown.
Imagine for a second that you're moving into a brand new, just pristine walled city. I mean, the architecture is stunning, the streets are perfectly clean, there is zero crime.
Right. You're describing a place where everything just works. Every house has, the same standard plumbing, the locks never break, and the guards at the gate check everyone's ID before they even let them in.
Exactly. But after a few weeks of living there, you start to notice this peculiar detail. The mayor of this beautiful city, well, they own the only grocery store.
Oh, right.
They own the only bank, they own the only delivery service. And if a merchant from outside the city wants to sell you, like a cup of coffee, they have to hand a quarter of their revenue directly to the mayor.
Yeah, which suddenly makes that beautiful wall around the city take on a slightly different meaning, doesn't it? I mean, Is it there to keep the bad guys out? Or is it there to keep your wallet locked in?
That exact tension is playing out right now between Apple and the country of Brazil. Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really highly curated shortcut for you today to help you understand a massive, frankly, tectonic shift happening in global tech and economics right now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation. We're basing today's discussion on a great analytical piece by EconWorks, and it's titled Apple, Brazil, and the Economics of Platform Control.
Right, and our mission today is to explore how Brazil, so not the US, not the EU, but Brazil, is suddenly becoming the absolute most fascinating testing ground on the planet for the future of big tech regulation, specifically looking at Apple's iOS ecosystem.
And, to the listener, while this might sound like some localized dispute about App Store rules and, contactless payments, it's actually answering the biggest economic questions of our time.
Right, like when exactly does a platform become a monopoly? And who really gets to control the future of innovation?
Exactly. And we are going to look at this totally impartially today. We want to examine this through two completely different economic lenses.
So no taking sides here.
No, not at all. On one side, we have the regulator's view, right, which is focused on market access and competition. And on the other, we have the platform's view, which focuses on product integration, security, and getting a return on their massive investments.
Right, because unpacking how these two perspectives are colliding in Brazil right now, it basically tells us everything we need to know about the future of the digital economy. So let's just dive right in.
Sounds good.
But before we even look at what the specific changes Brazil is forcing on Apple, we really have to understand the why. As in, why is Brazil able to move so incredibly fast compared to, say, the United States?
Yeah, and there is a defining institutional difference here. It essentially boils down to this dynamic of law versus economics.
I mean, break that down for us.
Sure. So the United States operates on what economists call a judicial model. Basically, antitrust enforcement there is overwhelmingly based on litigation. If the U.S. government thinks a tech giant is acting like a monopoly, they have to file this massive lawsuit in federal court.
Right, which triggers just years and years of discovery and motions and depositions.
Exactly. It takes forever. And critically, under that model, the government has to prove consumer harm after the fact.
Wait, meaning the damage to the market has already been done?
Yeah, precisely. They basically have to point to a whole graveyard of dead startup companies and say, look, Apple killed them with unfair rules 5 years ago. The technical term for this is ex post regulation. You evaluate the effects of a company's behavior long after they actually did it.
Wow. So it's incredibly slow.
It is. By the time a judge actually issues a ruling on a tech market in the U.S., the technology itself has often just completely moved on. You might be regulating smartphone dynamics from 2019, but the industry is already obsessed with AI or augmented reality.
Right. Which brings us to Brazil, because they are operating on a completely different frequency here.
Totally. Brazil uses an administrative model. Their competition authority, they're known as CADE, they do not wait for a decade of lawsuits to play out. They can launch a rapid intervention and impose forward-looking structural remedies immediately.
So they focus on market access from the jump.
Exactly. They look at market design ex ante meaning before the event, before the harm is fully realized.
Okay, I think a good way to think about this, it's the difference between building codes and lawsuits.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, Brazil is sending building inspectors to redesign the architecture of the App Store before anything collapses. That's ex ante. They're setting the construction rules. While the U.S. waits until the building literally falls down, crushes a bunch of startups, and then sues the architect in court, ex post.
What's fascinating here is that this isn't just a theoretical legal philosophy, right? This is a live economic experiment happening at breakneck speed.
And breakneck is honestly almost an understatement. The timeline in the EconWorks paper is wild. This entire saga started with a single complaint back in 2022 by Mercado Libre.
Right, the massive Latin American e-commerce company.
Yeah, they were trying to operate across the region and just kept hitting a brick wall with Apple's in-app billing rules. And to go from that one corporate complaint in 2022 to what paper says is a finalized cease and desist agreement, a TCC, by December 2025.
It's light speed. In the antitrust world, that is basically overnight.
And the implementation deadline for all these massive structural changes is right around the corner in April 2026.
Yeah, going from a complaint to forcing a total redesign of one of the most profitable tech ecosystems in the world in less than 4 years. Economists and regulators globally are essentially grabbing their popcorn right now.
Totally. They want to see if these rapid remedies actually create real competition or if human regulators tampering with a complex digital machine just creates a fragmented mess.
And, to even begin tinkering with that machine, Brazil's regulators had to make a really foundational move. They had to completely redefine what the machine actually is.
Right.
This is a paradigm shift called the gatekeeper concept.
Let's walk through this because it honestly flips traditional economics on its head. Traditionally, if you asked what market Apple competes in, you'd just say, well, the smartphone market, right?
Right, of course.
Apple makes the iPhone, Samsung makes the Galaxy, Google has the Pixel. They compete fiercely. So Apple clearly doesn't have a monopoly on all phones everywhere.
Exactly. If you define the market as all smartphones, Apple just looks like a standard competitor. A very successful one, but just a competitor. But Brazilian regulators are adopting what's called a within-ecosystem market definition.
A within ecosystem market. Okay.
They're no longer looking at the broad market of all hardware. They have strictly defined the relevant market as iOS app distribution.
So wait, the market isn't phones. The market is getting software onto an iPhone.
Precisely. And the logic there really rests on switching costs. The regulator's argument is that once you buy an iPhone, you set up iCloud, you maybe get an Apple Watch, you buy a bunch of apps, you are locked in.
The friction is too high to leave.
Exactly. Telling that locked-in consumer, hey, if you don't like the App Store policies, just throw it all away and buy an Android. Well, that isn't a realistic economic remedy. So for that specific user, iOS is the entire market.
Oh, wow.
And because iOS is the market, Apple is no longer viewed as a competitor within it. They are a gatekeeper with absolute control.
Okay, let's unpack this. If I buy an iPhone, I chose that ecosystem because I like how Apple curates it. Apple built the garden. Shouldn't they decide who gets to set up a stall inside it? I mean, I know that when I download like a random flashlight app on my iPhone, it isn't going to secretly mine crypto or steal my contacts because Apple aggressively polices that app store.
And that right there, you are voicing the absolute core antitrust trade-off.
Right.
Yeah, the platform's right to curate their product is a highly legitimate economic defense. If a company spends billions of dollars building a secure, beautifully integrated environment, stripping away their control over it, could totally destroy their incentive to build the next big thing.
Yeah, why invest in a secure OS if regulators are just going to knock the walls down and force you to let anyone operate inside it for free? I don't want the government telling a luxury hotel they have to let some random guy set up a hot dog stand in their lobby.
Exactly. But the counter-argument from the regulator is, well, what happens when that luxury hotel becomes the only place in town to conduct business? When that walled garden becomes so essential to daily life that holding the only key to the gate gives you an outsized, undue power over the broader economy. It's this constant tension between allowing entry for new competitors today versus preserving the incentives to innovate tomorrow.
Okay, so assuming Brazil's stance for a moment, that Apple is this gatekeeper of this specific iOS market, we need to look at the toll booths they actually control.
Yeah.
Because the research outlines 3 specific choke points that Brazil is targeting, right?
Yes. They are trying to shift iOS from a model of closed control to regulated access. And the first choke point is distribution control.
That's the App Store itself.
Right. Currently, requiring all software to be distributed exclusively through the official App Store creates a total bottleneck. Apple decides what gets approved, what gets rejected, how you rank in the search results.
And Brazil's remedy for that is mandating alternate app stores, meaning developers can offer apps to you outside of Apple's official store. You can effectively sideload software directly onto your device.
Exactly. Now, the second choke point is payment tying. Basically, when Apple mandates that any app on their phone has to use Apple's proprietary in-app billing system, they're linking access to the platform directly to their own financial services.
So it kills competition downstream.
Right. A developer can't just plug in a cheaper credit card processor like, say, Stripe or PayPal.
Right, like if I'm playing a game and I want to buy extra lives, the developer has to route my credit card through Apple, which triggers a hefty commission fee.
Yeah, typically around 30%. And Brazil's remedy here is twofold. First, they mandate third-party payment processing. And second, they remove what are called anti-steering restrictions.
Oh, anti-steering, this is a big one.
It is critical. Historically, Apple's rules prevented an app developer from even telling you that a cheaper option existed.
That's crazy. So like a music streaming app couldn't put a button saying, hey, go to our website and subscribe there for $2 less.
Exactly. They couldn't steer you away from Apple's toll booth. So Brazil's regulators are forcing that door completely open.
Okay, and the third choke point is hardware foreclosure, which specifically involves the NFC chip. That's the near-field communication hardware inside the phone that lets you tap your device at a cash register to pay.
Right. And by restricting third-party access to that specific physical chip, Apple prevents rival financial apps from offering a seamless tap-to-pay experience. You either use Apple Pay or you don't tap at all.
Wow. So these three choke points really dictate exactly how you, the listener, interact with your favorite apps and literally how you pay for groceries. Brazil mandating that these doors be forced open by April 2026 sounds like a massive victory for open markets.
It does sound like it on paper, but opening a door doesn't mean the toll booth just disappears.
Yeah, and here's where the economic reality gets incredibly complicated. Because forcing openness in form doesn't guarantee a change in economic control. Let's look at how Apple is reacting, keeping those two competing economic lenses in mind.
Right. So under the regulator perspective, a closed ecosystem is viewed primarily as market power leading to rent extraction. The belief is that this control allows the platform to extract super competitive commissions.
Meaning fees that are vastly higher than what a competitive market would naturally bear.
Exactly. In this view, a 30% cut is pure rent extraction. The tight rules aren't actually about security. They're there to exclude competitors and protect Apple's profit margins.
But the platform perspective argues that this ecosystem isn't a monopoly. It's a carefully integrated product design. Those fees aren't rent extraction. They're just cost recovery. I mean, Apple invests massively in server infrastructure, developer tools, privacy protocols.
Right, and they argue that this integration ensures a better user experience. From the platform's view, mandating open access risks fragmentation. It introduces security vulnerabilities, and it creates a huge free rider problem.
Oh, because alternative app stores would benefit from the billion-dollar hardware ecosystem without contributing to its upkeep.
Exactly. And this whole clash gets mathematically very real when you look at the new fee structures emerging. Because even as the ecosystem officially opens up, the money still tends to flow back to the gatekeepers.
Yeah, the EconWorks data breaks this down, and it is fascinating. If an app developer stays in the traditional app store and uses Apple's billing, the commission is roughly 25%, which is slightly lower than the old 30%, but still huge.
But now consider what happens if a developer tries to actually use the new freedoms Brazil is mandating. If they use an external link steering you outside the app to their own website to pay, Apple still charges them a 15% commission on that transaction.
Wait, even if the transaction happens on the developer's own website?
Yes. And if the developer goes further and uses a totally separate third-party app store to distribute their app, Apple charges a 5% core technology fee just for the privilege of that app running on an iPhone.
And if someone uses a third-party payment add-on instead of Apple Pay,
that's an extra 5%.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like a landlord who is legally forced to let you order takeout from outside restaurants, because previously they only let you eat at their cafeteria.
Right.
So you order a pizza. The delivery guy arrives, but the landlord stops him at the front gate and charges him a 15% cover charge.
Yeah.
Then the landlord turns to you and charges a 5% core sidewalk fee just because the delivery guy walked on the apartment's concrete.
That is the perfect way to visualize it.
Right, like sure, you have the freedom to order from anywhere, but the landlord is still extracting their toll.
And regulators actually have a name for this phenomenon: malicious compliance. The platform complies with the absolute letter of the law. They allow alternative stores and payments, but they alter the pricing structure, so the economic outcome remains basically identical.
So it really forces us to ask whether Brazil's structural changes are going to create genuine competition or just reshape how platform control is monetized.
Exactly. Because openness and form can easily coexist with economic control in practice. The math here strongly suggests that leaving the walled garden is designed to be just as expensive as staying inside it.
We could literally just be shuffling deck chairs on the economic Titanic here.
Yeah, we might be. And to see this tension play out in its purest form, we have to look at the biggest battleground right now: the NFC chip inside your phone.
Right, we mentioned this earlier. It's a tiny piece of hardware, but it is causing massive waves.
It really is a microcosm of everything we've been discussing. So in Brazil, the central bank created an instant payment system called Pix.
Oh yeah, Pix is wildly popular, right?
Ubiquitous. Almost everyone uses it for everything: splitting a dinner bill, buying groceries, even buying a car. And the conflict centers on whether Brazilian banks can use the iPhone's NFC chip to facilitate proximity Pix payments. They want you to be able to just tap your phone and pay via Pix, completely bypassing Apple Pay.
Which really boils down to one simple, profound question. Is that tiny silicon chip an essential input, or is it proprietary technology?
Exactly. The regulator position asserts that access to the NFC chip is an essential input for competition. In modern financial services, if you can't access that physical hardware, you simply cannot compete in retail payments.
Right. No one wants to type in numbers at a cash register anymore.
Exactly. Therefore, any fees or restrictions Apple places on that chip risk acting as a private tax on a public payment system.
But the platform position counters that the NFC hardware reflects massive private investment. I mean, Apple designed it, they integrated it, they secure it using complex tokenization. When you tap your phone, Apple Pay doesn't just beam your actual credit card number to the terminal. It transmits a secure token.
Right, which requires incredibly deep hardware integration. So they argue it's proprietary tech. Forcing them to hand over access to third parties compromises security and destroys their incentive to invent better, safer chips.
If we step back, we're seeing a fundamental shift in antitrust philosophy here. I mean, historically, antitrust regulators were obsessed with final consumer prices.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Are you paying too much for a gallon of milk?
Right, but the digital economy is completely different. Many of these services are technically free to the consumer. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the NFC dispute teaches us that control over access, whether that's access to a user base, to payment rails, or to a tiny piece of hardware, that is the true measure of monopoly power.
And because this is such a wildly new frontier, different parts of the world are taking completely different approaches. The global regulatory map is just fracturing right now.
The divergence is striking. If you look at the sources chart, the European Union has moved to a strict open access policy. Through their Digital Markets Act, multiple apps are legally allowed to compete for the NFC hardware directly. It's heavily regulated interoperability.
Meanwhile, the United States maintains a restricted access environment. It's the single platform control model. You either use Apple Pay or you don't tap your iPhone, period.
Right, and Brazil is carving out this fascinating middle ground. They are moving toward partial access. So it's limited access with strict new administrative rules drawn up by CADE and the central bank.
We're essentially watching a real-time policy experiment unfold. Rather than waiting for consumers to be harmed a decade from now, Brazil is actively redefining what a market is, mandating interoperability, and deeply scrutinizing how a tech giant prices its own infrastructure.
And the ultimate question Brazil's approach reframes for the rest of the world isn't just whether markets are competitive today, it's whether the underlying structure of these markets allows competition to emerge tomorrow.
Right. Can the next great innovator actually reach consumers, or will they be bottlenecked at the gate by a 5% core technology fee?
Exactly.
Well, you now have a front row seat to one of the greatest economic experiments of the decade. That April 2026 deadline in Brazil is going to be a massive watershed moment for digital ecosystems globally.
Absolutely. We're going to see if faster administrative interventions generate real competition, or if they just create unintended distortions like those convoluted malicious compliance fees we talked about.
Yeah. Or, on the flip side, does the slow, steady litigation of the U.S. produce more durable outcomes? Or does it just arrive a decade too late to matter?
The way these massive platforms strategically adapt to all these fragmented regimes over the next few years, it's going to literally rewrite the textbooks on platform economics.
It really is. And that leaves us with one final, slightly mind-bending thought to chew on. The EconWorks piece suggests an incredible next step for this kind of economic analysis. With the EU doing rigid rules, the US doing slow litigation, and Brazil sprinting ahead with administrative intervention. The global landscape is generating a massive amount of conflicting data.
Oh, a staggering amount of data.
And the source actually suggests that analyzing the cascading effects of these competing frameworks across all these jurisdictions might soon exceed human analytical capacity.
Right. Systematically comparing the economic reasoning, the pricing adaptations, and predicting how a regulation in Brazil affects a developer in Tokyo or Silicon Valley, that is a problem uniquely suited for artificial intelligence.
So you really have to ask yourself, if the digital ecosystems we all live in have become too mathematically complex for traditional courts and human regulators to manage quickly, will we soon be relying on AI to referee the tech giants that are building those very same AIs?
A technological solution to a technological monopoly, it's a fascinating paradox to consider.
It really brings us right back to our walled city. We're arguing over who holds the keys to the gates, but the city itself is getting smarter, faster, and just more complex every single day. We hope this deep dive gave you a new lens to view the digital world in your pocket. Keep questioning the infrastructure around you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of EconWorks. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at EconWorks, thanks for listening.